We are live and in living color. Hey, welcome everyone to the Community Data Cluster session. We are honored to have Susan, the new ESIP executive director. Say hi, Susan,
Hi,
in our
Susan.
session. So we feel very honored, and I wanted to get this out front for anybody who was just coming to consume content. This is not that kind of party. This is where we roll up our sleeves and get to work. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and do a little introduction to the cluster itself, and then hand it over to my co-chair. So, all right, I'm going to ask the same question every other person says. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so yeah, this is the community data cluster, the Doathon edition, and I think in the SCED description, we talked about what a do-a-thon is. It's the expanded version of a hackathon where we take all the skills that everybody brings and we put everyone to work, from actual coding and data analysis to policy, and legal issues and anything else that the problem demands. So let's talk about the origins of the cluster. Started a couple of years ago when Lynn Yarmy and I went to a meeting at MIT called Data for Black Lives. And this is one of the tweets that came out in the Center for Media Justice to expand our idea what climate data is or are. And this really struck me because going to ESIP for the last, better part of the decade, is we normally just talk to each other and we solve problems in our professional lives and do pipeline development with the next generation of data professionals and academics. But we don't try to solve problems on the ground with people we don't know, or and some of those problems are quite urgent and quite newsworthy. So, ESIP's value proposition from a couple of years ago to help members of the earth science data community find each other across organizations. We've done that really well. We've built a great community and we've built up this resources, and we do make data matter together. But we don't do things like this. When And this was one of the tweets, people residing in the first world countries forced to live in third world conditions. And in these particular cases, it's because the people on the ground who are doing the bulk of the suffering do so for a lack of information. One of the particular problems was sea level rise in Little Haiti. There's groundwater problems in North Carolina, and in particular the 6 or now 7-year-old problem of not having potable water in Flint, Michigan. Since that time, we had Data for Black Lives in addition to ESIP. I met a very impressive young man at the RDA plenary in Botswana, and he worked for an organization called the Engine Room. And the best way I know how to describe them is they are the nerd Avengers. They are not geographically based. They come into any community around the world and will try to solve problems. And you can see that they're not above soldering at the PC board level, programming, legal issues, policy, and activism. One of the particular problems that they solved that was very close to what we're doing is, and that tells you a lot about where we are right now in the United States, is they solved a very similar problem with not groundwater, but potable water, drinking water in Zimbabwe. So we brought them in to help us frame the problem and to work through things, and, or as I might say, keep us from doing stupid things that they've done already. So here we are, 7 years later, where things are standing in the Flint water crisis. And why are the residents still scared to drink their water? Is because they don't know. They don't have data, as far as we can tell. And that's one of the objectives. The objectives of this do-a-thon is to find this information, start to uncover things. We're all data professionals. We know how to get at this information. We know how to evaluate information, make time series, evaluate tabular data. We are the people who have the talents to close this gap. So as far as we can tell, there is advice to Flint residents. There are some things that are useful and some things that aren't, but there are also links that are dead ends. So this is a particular page that has supposed to have information about lead and copper amounts in the water. And as you can see, it's a big 404. And so that doesn't bode well for people who maybe are using their mobile phones in Flint and are trying to find out if their water is drinkable. So they've been using the sort of turbidity color test, and if it looks rusty, they don't drink it. Meanwhile, they have to drive 6 to 7 miles to get pallets of individual water, not to mention what that does for the environment in terms of the amount of plastics that get recycled. But just to bathe their children and to cook requires something that you might see in the developing world, and that's right here in the United States. In particular, these communities need knowledge, not NetCDF. So we're used to working with data, the finer points of metadata and interoperability, but what people really need is to translate the numbers on the page into something that they can use, something into knowledge, something they can go to their policymakers, their community leaders, and advocate for an improvement in their condition. So the real trick of it for us is to take it beyond something that we normally do, which is just not files within an operating system, but to really translate that information into something, into maps, into single numbers, and into, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down on the potability of their tap water. Is this an environmental justice problem? Well, you make the call, but it is a community that's 53% Black. And so usually that has some correlation with how much infrastructure is either built or rebuilt and improved for the residents of those communities. So this is something else that we need to tease out of the available data. And this is directly from the US Census for 2019. So the other day, one of our plenary speakers, very impressive plenary speaker, put up this slide, and I immediately went and found it because I thought, well, you know, this is the alignment of sustainable goals out of the UN. And our particular problem actually solves about 7 of these, or addresses about 7 of these, from good health, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities, life on land, and of course, partnerships. We're building these partnerships so going forward, long term, we can leverage these partnerships into solving many of this nation's problems. You know, ESIP is a U.S.-based organization. So among the other problems, again, you know, we have sea level rise in coastal communities. We have oil pipelines going through native lands. We have a bunch of different things. And no matter where you fall in it politically, there's a surprising lack of information. On the other side, there are all these data professionals in this organization called ESIP that can solve this problem. And so this is the cluster where we roll up our sleeves, use our talents and our experience and our inclination to get to work. So depending on all the people assembled to solve these problems, and we want to go beyond what we talked about last summer and actually start to I don't want to steal Andrea's thunder, but start to put some things together that will move this problem forward. And I have a problem with the word resilient, which means you just come back to where you are. And for some people, it's resilient, they go back to where they are. That means they still can't drink the water out of their tap. So we need to go beyond resilient and not accept the harm that's coming into these communities, but improve the situation and bring it into the real developed world standards. And on that note, I'd like to hand it over to my co-chair, Andrea Thummer.
Okay. So thanks, Steve. So what we're going to do today is, like Steve said, that we're having a do-a-thon today. So this differs from a hackathon in that we are not directly like trying to build stuff, but rather we're doing the legwork that's necessary for us to start working towards building stuff in an informed and research sort of driven sort of way. So let me share my screen real quick. Desktop 1. Okay, so can you see my desktop now?
Yes.
Okay, great. like Steve said, our focus for today is on water quality for Flint, Michigan, and depending on how many people, we could expand that to Southeast Michigan in general. One of the reasons we're working on this is because there are still issues with the drinking water there, and this is something that Steve has been really wanting to tackle for a long time, and I agree is important. But in addition to working on this one problem, part of what we're trying to do with this session, and honestly through the next two sessions that we want to have at ESIP meetings, so ESIP winter and ESIP summer of next year, is not just work towards doing stuff for Flint, but build a pipeline that we can, and kind of a workflow that we can start to deploy for other problems that we might want to tackle. So our idea is basically that we're going to start with this do-a-thon today, where we're going to complete what's called a landscape analysis for this area, which is basically coming up with a big list of resources, answering a couple key questions that are going to help us get started on figuring out, really nailing down what is the problem in this area so that we can then move on to working towards solutions. And our plan is to use what we do today as a jumping off point for further work in the community data cluster, and then another working session in winter ESIP, where we start doing some ideation around what kinds of tools could we build, what kinds of data services could we as ESIP build to help this community in some way. And then finally, like summer 2021, we're thinking that's when we would do an actual hackathon of some sort.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hey, Andrea.
Can
Sorry.
you the screen enlarge, zoom in a little bit? Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Better? Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, and this is also the link that's from the Kiko chat sked thingamajig. So if you want to bring it up yourself. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. So our idea is that we're going to break you all out into groups of 3 to 6 people or so. What we'll ask you, we'll assign you each a question to try to tackle. So each breakout group will get one question to tackle, and these are the questions. So first of all, figure out who is being most affected by this problem and how. So who is still struggling with water quality issues in Flint, Michigan, and how so. Question number 2 is what research and data is already available that tracks that problem and harms. That one, I think we're probably going to have 2 groups working on, or maybe a larger group working on, because I see that as being something that ESIP could particularly dig in on. And then from that, we want to try to answer what research is needed to further understand the problem and harms. Question 3 is what are the root causes of the crisis? So why is this an issue still? And question 4 is who is already doing the work and what are the tools of their advocacy? So does that mean they're creating policy? Are they creating tools? Are they creating water quality testing kits? So who else is trying to do work in this space that we would want to collaborate with or join forces with somehow? So in your breakout groups, you'll be working on one of these questions and basically spending a bunch of time working together to Google for stuff. So trying to find resources like papers, data sets, relevant policy, presentations, news coverage, lists of other agencies, things like that. So if you're an academic, you can think of this as doing a big lit review, sort of like background section before you write your fancy grant. And that's basically it. That's going to be our focus for this session. We're going to try to keep about 20 minutes at the end for a wrap-up discussion where we can share what we found and what else we need to find and talk about next steps as part of this. One last little thing that I wanted to plug here. Part of the other goal for this session is to try to get you all involved in the community data cluster. So theoretically, we meet every month. Realistically, every once in a while, we have to cancel that because Steve's like on a cruise to Antarctica for data reasons or something. We'd really like to get some more people involved and, keep pushing this work forward in between meetings as well as at the ESIP meetings. So please keep that in mind. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Any questions so far? Cool. Awesome.
I wanted to say that Megan looks like she's trying to control the galaxy.
Yeah.
She's reaching into a nebula and she's moving some gas clouds around. It's kind of crazy. Nice, Megan. I didn't know you had those skills. Hey, functionally, so when you go into your breakout, you're going to need to assign somebody as a moderator. It could be light touch moderation if it's a small group, or a little bit more active if there's more people. But also, you'll need a person who's going to record, and then as a group, you can decide who's going to report out at the end. Andrea, did I get that right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah, and here's where you should record. I'm going to share my screen again so I can explain what this is. I'll paste this into the chat in just a second. But I've made a big slide deck, just a Google slide deck for you all to put your notes in. Right now it just says group 1, group 2, group 3. So based on whatever breakout room number you're in, please pick that slide and write down what question you're tackling. And I think I'll number you off. You might have to jump into the groups to tell you what question to tackle. Yeah, write down your participants and then start working into slides to add resources as needed. And feel free to add more slides if you need to branch out into other space.
And if you're wondering where all of this is going, one of the exercises that we were, or one of the tasks that we were given, actually, that Data for Black Lives has found most effective in going in these communities is doing two things: identifying the research gaps. So there may be a lack of data, lack of research, a general lack of organization around a particularly important issue. And then that would result in something that Andrea and I recently discovered called asset mapping. So as we go into this world where we're trying to help other people, we need to speak the language. And one of the most important things is to go in with an asset map, knowing, and it's exactly what it sounds like, knowing, where are the assets on the ground, what assets aren't there, the strengths and the weaknesses, so that you can actually start to have the conversation about what needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. And so all these questions that we've gotten for this landscape analysis, they've largely been provided from our collaborator at Data for Black Lives. So we're basically using their workflow to build our own workflow. So I feel good about this direction. So, okay. Go ahead. I see one hand. Yeah.
Do you have you compiled some degree of summary or activities over the last year or so? What, for example, we just said, is there a document that synthesizes what you've done so far?
Not really, and that's part of why we're doing this.
Okay.
Because a lot of it has been kind of happening through just through discussion during community data cluster meetings, but we have not actually compiled it. So we figured why not use this session to do that. So don't worry about doubling up on work or anything like that, because I think we're still in very early days for things.
Thank you.
And we recently settled, and we can credit Mark Parsons with pushing us to a single issue to get the ball rolling, because we were very satisfied talking about everything. But, we were supposed to be about something that was tangible. And so Mark was like, hey, you guys haven't decided yet. I was here 2 months ago. And so we decided. And so this is really the first session meeting where we will focus on just doing one thing right. And hopefully what we come out of this with will scale to other problems.
Yeah. Okay, awesome.
All right, so what is the ideal breakout group size? 6 people here.
I think let's split people into 4 groups. And we had talked about 3 to 6 people being a pretty good group size. So that'll split nicely between the 4 questions that we outlined. And I'm pasting those into the slide deck right now so that you can, you don't have to switch back and forth between things.
Okay, so 4 groups will give you 6 to 7 participants in each room.
Yeah.
What length of time would you like?
I think we had said 50 minutes to work on this and then come back And Steve and I were planning on kind of floating in between groups. Also, my student Michael Leonard is here also, and he was going to help float between groups and check in and see if anybody needs help with things too.
Okay. So if anybody doesn't like where they are for whatever reason, you can always come back to the main room and I can put you somewhere else. And I will.
Hey, I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ethan McMahon from EPA. I think this is really cool. I don't usually get hung up on format, but I think we might end up getting tons and tons of resources, you know, assets, whatever. And it, like a text kind of document might be a good place to store all of them. And maybe we just summarize it up on the slides, you know, because like then you could even put snippets of text into your text document and say, oh, here's the key thing highlighted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Ethan, I'm going to suggest that we stick with the slide format as a sort of a 30,000 foot view, but make a new Google Doc that's publicly shareable and link it into that page. Okay. And then that'll give you, and then you can expand and do that. And if you want to go ahead and use other things like a spreadsheet or whatever else, link those in as well. But use your Google slide as your organization point. Does that work? I'm getting a thumbs up.
Yeah, you're frozen on a thumbs up, so we'll assume that.
That he's super enthusiastic? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, remind me of the time again. I apologize. I was listening.
Say that again, Megan.
What time you want for the breakout rooms?
Let's say 45 minutes.
Okay. All right, ready to go whenever you guys are.
Okay.
Go get a MESIP.
And remember, come back to the main room if you have any questions or want to go elsewhere, and that does apply to you organizers as well.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you.
Over the transporter, and you just suddenly got snatched out of a room, Rapture style, and you ended up somewhere else.
Or transported for a slightly less, you know, dramatic Star Trek transporter style.
Yeah, you know, but you don't want the molecule scramble, right?
Yeah. I just watched the one about transporter psychosis or whatever.
Right. So it splits your personality.
Yeah.
So we get evil Justin.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, wimpy Justin, who just can't get anything done.
Yeah.
Hey, Nicole, how'd you can make it? Boom.
Hi, I'm glad to be a part of this.
So, before we get started on everybody's report out, and hopefully you've chosen a person, I wanted to introduce everybody to Nicole Triplett. She is the Director of Policy for Data for Black Lives. Say hello, Nicole. I don't know if you have a little bit that you wanted to say to the group.
Sure, I can give a quick overview of Data for Black Lives and maybe perhaps like why I'm creeping in on these discussions or this one discussion. Stephen has been working with Data for Black Lives, which is a movement of activists, organizers, mathematicians, lawyers, committed to using data science to create concrete and measurable change for social good. We routinely investigate big data, big tech, as it relates particularly on the lives of Black communities, people in Black communities. And since computing, big data, and algorithms have like penetrated every aspect of our lives, we've been facilitating a network of folks to connect people to resources on how to like advance certain goals, to undo the harms and the inequities that we were seeing. And we believe data is a critical tool to do that. And so I think, Stephen, you became immersed in our family or network through our annual conferences.
That's right.
That we've been holding to bring, you know, people from multiple disciplines together to talk about issues that, you know, span from water crises, food insecurity, policing, housing issues, migration issues, but grounding that in a racial justice framework, a critical race theory framework, to really use data to advance the undoing of those harms. And so we have folks in our network who are on the ground in Flint. We don't have a hub there where we like regularly work with them, but as we shared with Stephen and others, we're wanting to see how we can play a role in supporting and facilitating these efforts so that the fruit of this work could play as a resource to on the ground efforts there. And I'll just stop right there unless folks have questions.
So if you don't have questions right away for Nicole, we'll take them at any time during the remainder of our session, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrea to coordinate the report outs from the various groups. I'm excited to see, based on the questions that were given to each group, what you guys came back with.
Yeah, great. So let's just go top to bottom. So group one, the question y'all were tackling, and me, I was in this one for most of it, was who is being most affected by this problem and how? So that is, I think Sebastian was going to do our report out.
Yeah, it is I. So right, there was sort of a little twofold problem. First the who, then the how. And so I think initially we found a lot of data on where places were being tested and what the test results were, but there wasn't any inherent demographic data attached. We could pretty readily find data on Flint's general demographics. And near the end, we found some extremely detailed, I think, academic data on racial demographic breakdowns of specific neighborhoods and other geospatial units. There was some articles and studies that we found that had demographic data about poverty, rent versus ownership of the home, and highest degree level kind of thing. But that was a little more sparse. And then as far as the how, there have been several studies done on how it's impacted children's ability to learn. And then a variety of different direct results from what happens when people are exposed to this to higher lead and other metals in the water, and then some thoughts around, well, how does this affect your mental state if you have to keep going to find clean water elsewhere and other things. And I think one of the main things we were looking to create is sort of combining geospatial test results and some of the demographic data that was more fine-grained to see if we can more accurately correlate who is being affected and how. But this was the 30,000 foot view.
Awesome, thanks. Group two, so the question you were tackling was what research and data is already available that tracks the problem and harms, and what research is needed. So also the caveat with all of these is that these are big questions, and of course you're not going to get to a perfect answer in 45 minutes of Googling, so.
I guess I can go through this. We very quickly ran out of space on the slides, and so we put in a Google Doc, and that link to that is in the slides. So our question, what was it? I cleared the slides off. What research data is already available that tracks the problem and the harms, and then what research is needed to further understand the problem and the harms. We looked at a bunch of different kinds of things for figuring out where and specifically sort of test results are and where you could find this information. So we have some links to state test information results, some state blood test results, things like that. EPA water quality data portals, the EPA Flint landing pages, and some reports. We also talked about different mapping platforms, both where you could see specifically what lines might be lead-based and which ones might not be as part of the effort to replace it. but also recognizing that those projects may have come about in different ways through different methods, sometimes through community surveying, other times through an AI. And so being able to understand, I think throughout we talked about the provenance of the data is really, really important. So talking about how people could report different kinds of issues that they might see, getting to some details about different kind of maps that were available or that could be available, as well as some general articles, books and articles about both the sort of politics of the data around lead pipe replacement, as well as the continuing sort of question and the way that different people answer the question, does Flint still have clean water, and the different sources of data that they will marshal to answer that question, either in the affirmative or the negative. And as well as talking about some community and citizen science efforts, some of which are highly problematic, as well as, I think that was everything, along with some books and articles that discuss that as well. Is there anything I missed from the rest of group 2?
Awesome. Great. Thanks. I am curious about the problematic citizen science projects, which we can, what do you mean? How are they problematic? So
Mark Edwards being valorized as the savior of Flint and now suing a bunch of people for defamation.
Yeah.
So I put a link to Ben Pauly's book, Flint Fights Back, where he has a really excellent discussion of that whole thing.
Cool. So. Great. Thank you.
If I could jump in to add one more thing, the question of, are there recommendations that can be made to the citizens of Flint, and elsewhere where they were exposed or they think they may have been exposed to lead, for their health going forward? For example, nutritional recommendations that may help them. So that's just one more element to think about.
Great.
Thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
No worries.
Thank you. Group 3, what are the root causes of the crisis?
Hi, this is Ethan McMahon. I'm going to speak for this group. Actually, can you display, is there a way for us to display the actual presentation, or is that being done?
I can do that.
Yeah, we're on slide 6. Okay, so just before that, it's slide 6, even though it's empty.
Yeah, well, it wasn't empty.
I just bear with me.
Okay. Oh, okay.
We just got 3 slides, and what we realized is that to find the root causes, we have to figure out how to figure out what the root causes are, and that's a complicated step. So next slide, we found a methodology on Super Wikipedia that says, here's how you do it. You identify and describe the problem, you establish a timeline, you distinguish between root causes and other causes, and then you show this on a graph, and you eventually end up with a root cause. And just for reference, we put more details here on the bottom of this slide that overflows. So for next slide, we decided to figure out define the problem as, what's the problem today? Because the problem has morphed over time. Some solutions have been made, different problems have erupted, like people getting ill at different times. Like, was that the problem, or is the water the problem? It's a really hard thing to figure out what the actual problem is. So we said, for today at least, we don't even know if these are the exact problems, but we're just positing that these 3 things are the problem. That people don't trust that the water is safe, that people don't trust the government, and that the water quality is actually unsafe. So we don't even know if those are the actual things, but we didn't have time to really figure that all out. This is a very process-oriented thing that we had to do. Second was to establish a timeline, and we did create a shared document that has a bunch of these key events, and we didn't get to a completed version of that, but we have, again, kind of the beginnings of that. You know, Zachary, it might make sense. Do you want to say what some of those key events are, if you feel comfortable? Zach?
Sorry, couldn't find the screen to unmute it. I think there are a lot of key events, but I think one of the things we particularly found was sort of playing out the key events, because all the problems sort of evolved throughout the key events that occurred. And so that all of this sort of root problemming, as you kind of said earlier, relates to problems that evolve over time and sort of need to be analyzed within the context of a timeline.
Right, right. That's helpful. And then the third step is honestly a lot of the distinguishing between the root cause and other causal factors. So, you know, some of us thought maybe we should have some kind of relationship diagram that shows how the different things like symptoms of the problem and actual potential causes of the problem are laid out. You just have a big graph. And then for step 4, you really would extract out like the key things that fit. And you'd end up with a graph that looks like this one. Again, an example from Wikipedia that shows, you know, what you think the problem is, what some of those symptoms might be, potential root causes, and then some evaluation, the root cause. So that's as far as we got.
Okay.
Anyone else on group 3 describe any things that were left out or misrepresented?
No, I think you did it. I think you did a great job. One of the ways that we got around to thinking about this is another methodology, you know, the 5 whys, where you start asking, well, this is what happened, why? And yeah, the water was unsafe. So why was the water unsafe? You know, they switched water sources. Why did they switch water sources? Because of the government. And so I think those two, well, the Wikipedia article, Mark said it was 5 whys. We started out with 3. So it's all kinds of different numbers there. But I think those two kind of ideas work well together in trying to figure this out.
This is great. And I mean, I think one of the things that's, I don't know, this issue of people not trusting, lack of trust, and like what the water crisis has done to trust is an interesting one that might be, I think would be worth continuing to talk about. But to be mindful of time, we should move on to group 4.
Okay, so I think I'm reporting out for group 4. We had very similar lessons that came out of group 3. And I personally, I just like to say this was amazing. This lightning research in 45 minutes, I think, produced a lot. It was really good. So our question was, who's already doing this work and what are the tools and their advocacy? And if you're looking at slide 9, you'll see the participants. We also just did a Google Doc, so you can get the details in the Google Doc. But we basically chunked it up into 4 categories: the federal response, state level response, municipal response, and then private NGO response. No, so 5 categories, but I'm not seeing the 5th. I guess it didn't make it on the slide. But we also had the academic response, which I will talk about briefly. And so the Google Doc provides more details, but just sort of, you know, the key message at each of those scales. At the federal level, the federal government, well, particularly the EPA, claims to have addressed the problem. And they have a nice website that sort of lays out, you know, here's what we did. And the water source switched back to the original source some time ago, but these long-term and systemic issues remain. And these things may well extend well beyond Flint. And academics, including the national academies and the feds themselves through the Office of the Inspector General, have really critiqued the EPA response. And so there's a lot of information there to sort of see, you know, how we can do this better. At the state level, I think it's kind of sort of similar. So with support from CDC, the state provides some basic drinking quality data and monitoring and so forth, but it's not at a particularly granular or useful level. And I think it's similar at the municipal level, that there's a lot of testing at the city level, but they're not that information is not necessarily accessible to those who are most vulnerable or those who have other things that they have to deal with. For example, you have to have someone over 18 at home for 24 hours to get fully tested. At the private NGO level, there's a bunch of organizations, and I encourage you to check out our Google Doc, which I've now lost in my thousand windows. And then finally at the academic level, and I think I'll let Stefan chime in on that because he looked into specifically what Virginia Tech has been doing and particularly what the controversial researcher has been doing. And it's interesting, he's being sued, he's suing people. I guess my overall takeaway is that at all levels, there has been a lack of coordination and coherence in terms of how to respond. I would welcome my other group members to chime in because I'm pretty sure I didn't cover it all well.
Yeah,
I do want to briefly break in and say that it's 5:30, so we understand if people need to jump off, but we're going to stay for another 5 minutes at least to continue wrapping things up. So,
okay, just to follow up on the Virginia Tech comment there, the professor was one of the leading persons that got into it, and I don't know how much people have heard about all the different things, but then later on was the Legionnaires outbreak, and some of the local officials had said everybody has to die sometime, and their lack of responding, has had legal action. So got to keep doing the right thing. That's I guess my comment. I'll turn it over to other people.
Mark, did you have anything else? Or
I sort of wanted to comment just on kind of looking through, going down from like federal to state to city. A lot of these portals and reports love to say like, the water's fine going into the pipes, but then actually monitoring it like in people's homes is clearly a big problem. So, I mean, I think that sort of struck me as like sort of passing the buck, like, oh, it's fine where we test it, but clearly the problem's a lot bigger than that. So,
yeah. Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
That's a really good point, and I think that is probably something that we can take away as a pattern. We ticked our box. It's not our problem.
Susan, our new ESIP fearless leader, was in our group, and she made that good point that distinguishing what kind of data we are surfacing or working with. Is it we're focusing on the pipes? Is it on the main pipes? Is it on what's coming out of the faucet in individual houses versus what's in the blood of the people who live in those houses? Mm-hmm. We spent a good chunk of effort, sort of, at least some of us within the group, distinguishing between, or rather than doing the Googling, doing the thinking about how to think about this and what is it we're looking for. So hopefully there's some helpful notes in our Google Doc.
Great.
There's one other cautionary note about, Mark, you referred to ticking the boxes. There was a big uproar about lead in drinking water fountains many years ago, like I'd say circa more like the early 90s. And I believe that EPA thought that they had solved that issue by requiring testing of school drinking water fountains. There was supposed to be a testing program. And, I think the perspective was, well, we solved that issue. We don't need to worry about that. And then it turned out in part in the wake of Flint, well, no, actually, there's still a lot of high lead water coming out of drinking water fountains in schools. So unfinished business is still lurking out there. And government agencies do have a tendency to declare success. Okay, we took care of that. It's not a problem anymore. Move on to the next thing.
Can I say one thing about our group one? Who's being affected by the problem most? I think we naturally bled into what group 2 was doing, and that's okay. One thing we weren't able to do, but we found the data for the analysis, is to overlay a map of at the block level, which area, what's the hazard for lead poisoning or lead contamination from drinking water. And then also the demographic data, which is the census data is broken up in many different ways. So if we could just take those two data sets and overlay them, I think we could do some really good analysis about who exactly is being affected and see if there's any systemic or systematic patterns of discrimination, for example, if certain demographics are being disproportionately impacted just based on that analysis. And we thought that someone must have already done that. So our first step, I guess, instead of doing the ArcGIS desktop exercise, because we have the data, we can do it, but is to just go look in the literature, look for those specific keywords to find the publication.
I'll throw in that actually group 2, while that wasn't the intention, did come up with a few things like that, like some map sources and ArcGIS story map and some other things. I made a quick comment that some of our questions do flow into another, and I'm wondering if, in addition to folks continuing to build on these, is there someone in the group that would be willing to sort of conceptually organize all of our Google resource docs into one?
Yeah, so I think this is a good segue to us wrapping up and letting you move on to wherever you need to go next. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Steve for our closing ceremonies.
Yeah, well, ceremonies. I don't think there's a torch.
I hope
run
so.
Around the track. Yeah, there's a digital torch. No, I wanted to thank everybody for showing up with enthusiasm and, following instructions to roll up the sleeves and get to work. I think it's astounding the amount of parallel processing that has happened and the amount of creativity that went into the research. We now have a rich resource to start off on our single-threaded problem that has multiple threads inside. I think our next step is to take it back into the community cluster monthly meetings, along with Data for Black Lives, the Engine Room, and the other allies that we pick up along the way, and refine this into action. We will do our part as co-chairs to refine what you have here. You've given us a great gift. And remember, the us is all of us. You're part of the cluster now. So show up to the monthly meetings. Thank you to Nicole for coming in and providing those guidance questions that got us to where we are now. And I think we're off to a really good start with solving this problem. And again, what does success look like? Success looks like the people of Flint not having fear because they know whether or not the water is potable or not. And we're getting there. We're getting there, and we don't see any other focused effort with any enthusiasm in this area. So it's a really good feather in the cap of ESIP. Susan, you can claim this as your maiden voyages with a cluster and say, once I showed up, they really got down to business. So we'll let you claim that. Again, and my greatest thanks goes to my co-chair, Andrea, who really brought a unique set of skills and focus to the group. And without her, we wouldn't be where we are now. So thanks, everybody. I hope to see you at all the sessions tomorrow. And if Nicole, Andrea, and Megan could stay on the call, we have a little wrapping to do.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Sign up for the community data listserv.